Listen now of a time long past when sorcery thrived and wild adventure was forever in the offing.
It's Monster Mondays with me, Geoff Arbuckle. Hey everybody, it's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. I'm Geoff Arbuckle, and this is Monster Mondays presented to you by Film Seizure. You can catch new episodes of Film Seizure with myself and Jason Oliver on Wednesdays, but Mondays, you know what I'm about to say. They're for me to talk about monster movies. Now that I've talked about an alien monster with last week's look at Extro, let's talk about a little more mythical style of creatures and sorcery and swords. Specifically, let's talk about the sword and the sorcerer. This is one that I definitely remember watching as I grew up. It seemed to be on TV constantly, which is funny because this is another that is currently not in print. DVDs can still be found, but you may have to pay a little more than you would typically want to. This is directed by Albert Pyun. He's relatively well revered as a schlock master. And he's a very interesting guy in his own right. Pyun suffers from dementia. He worked on a film called Interstellar Civil War for years. He cut it, recut it, and kept tinkering away at it until he finally completed it. The whole time, he kept notes and did behind-the-scenes videos and diaries about his work and how his health was affecting it. He's probably best known for making movies like the 1990 Captain America, as well as Cyborg and Alien from L.A., all associated in some way to canon films. This movie is about a man who uses black magic and sorcery to take control of a kingdom. So this guy, Cromwell, who is played by Richard Lynch, massacres a whole goddamn army of good guys. The king is executed, and the queen is able to wound Cromwell, but when she doesn't proclaim him king, he kills her too. Unable to save either his mother or father, the final child of the king, Talon, becomes a general of mercenaries, and he comes home to avenge his family's slaughter 11 years later. So here's the deal. It's not just Talon versus Cromwell. There's also this guy named Xuxa, the slimy, gross monster man, and he's going up against Cromwell. See, Cromwell resurrected him, but then he betrayed him as well, like instantly. We also have a rebellion led by a prince named Micah, who has a double agent inside Cromwell's trusted advisors, but then that guy is also like a triple agent. And Micah has a sister who's like a hot babe. But anyway, good guys do good guy things. Bad guys do bad guy things. Sorcerers do sorcery. Movie happens. It's actually a pretty dense fantasy movie. What is kind of interesting about it is what makes it so dense is that it's one of the things that I'll talk about a little bit later when I get to my 3 things that I like. It's relatively good at world building. And on top of that, you have all of these characters who seem to be kind of playing different angles of trying to achieve a certain goal. Like Talon has his goals. Cromwell's just trying to hold on to his evil kingdom. You have the gross slimy monster man who wants revenge on just everything. And you have like the new rebel king guy who was the son of a friend of Talon's father. There's just all of these connections, but the movie actually is pretty good at moving along at a pretty decent pace and really kind of make sure that you stay interested with action, set pieces, and so on and so forth. And like I said, I can't really take the time to get into all of the ins and outs because of the complexity and the density of it. But I will say that I do have time to talk about my 3 things that I love about this movie. For the first thing that I want to talk about, let's talk about this opening scene to this movie. Holy shit, this scene is badass. So a witch resurrects the slimy, gross monster guy, Zuxa, to help the Richard Lynch Cromwell character overthrow a peaceful kingdom. So first, the witch, before resurrecting the gross monster man, has this wall of faces that talk to her and show her things and tell her like the future. And it's an amazingly cool effect. Then, out of the sludge, she resurrects the monster man, who just looks like he's covered in grossness. And when Cromwell is like, well, I don't know who this guy is. I don't know if he's, worth a shit. I don't know if he's going to be able to help me do what I want to do. So to prove his strength, the gross monster man tears the witch's heart out of her chest from across the room and catches it in his fucking hand. Now, if you want to talk about making a first impression, this is how you would do it. Like, no shit. I mean, just go to a job interview, and when you're asked, inevitably, as you always are, why this company should hire you, from across the room, tear out that fucking HR rep's fucking heart and say, because of this, I guarantee you get that fucking job. Without a doubt, you get that job. Second, Talon's famed weapon is a 3-bladed sword. This was during a time, thanks to Star Wars, when every weapon carried by a hero had to have some sort of gimmick. Star Wars, of course, had the lightsabers. Krull, which was another fantasy movie that I may eventually talk about on this show from around the same time, had a bitchin' throwing star thing that had like a bunch of blades on it. Even Excalibur was kind of a gimmick itself. Here, we have a 3-bladed fucking sword. When one wasn't enough for you to kill a man, you get 3 to slice his ass all the shit. But for really young kids like me in the 80s, that sword was boss. I mean, I remember, because this movie was on so often and I saw it so many times, I so desperately wanted that 3-bladed sword. Like, I don't know if they ever actually, I think they made toys of it, but like, I would have been really, really young, probably too young to have been swinging around a sword, and no telling if it was even that readily available or that affordable. But I would have loved to have had a replica of that sword. Lastly, I really appreciate, as I had mentioned earlier, the world building in this movie. It's fair to say what a lot of critics said upon its release, that it doesn't care much about characters. Like, there are a lot of characters, but it's clear that this movie was trying to be in the same ilk as Excalibur, which is also one of my very favorite fantasy films of all time. There are factions here that are warring. You have maybe too many factions and crosses and double crosses and so forth. However, the film does build a world. Like, you have an understanding of what people want, what the characters are trying to do, even if there are too many characters or too many crosses and double crosses and factions and so forth. You get the idea that a warlord wanted to become king. The king he wanted to take down was beloved for the peace he brought for 20 years. The son of that king wants revenge, and there's this new ruler rising. Oh, and there's a monster man who wants to kill everything. You understand that, and it's easy to follow. There's good adventure to be found here. It's not exactly the most intelligent of movies. It's something you nearly expect to be seen on Mystery Science Theater 3000. It's still all good fun, though. It's a movie that could not be released today without a bunch of neckbeards making fun of it on YouTube, or, to be cool or impress their hipster friends or anything like that. It wanted to be a series. It advertised a sequel at the end that didn't come until almost 30 years after. And it featured a new set of characters and Kevin Sorbo. By all accounts, it is an absolutely terrible film. Maybe that's the one that really would belong best on MST3K. And speaking of Mystery Science Theater 3000, this movie has a brief appearance by MST3K all-time all-star Reb Brown. If you're not familiar with him or sure why he's considered one of the greatest things to ever happen to that show, go to YouTube and search for Best of MST3K Space Mutiny. I think you'll thank me for that. That wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. This movie is a little light on the monster action, but don't worry, I'll be getting back to something a little bit more classic over the next several weeks. Until next week, I'll see you later, and don't forget to check out new episodes of Film Seizure every Wednesday and a new installment of Monster Mondays each Monday on filmseizure.com. And also be sure to check out new posts at my website, bmovieanima.com, each and every Friday.
The Sword and the Sorcerer.